And class is in session. You're listening to Shit Shooting 101. I'm your host, Joshua Lee. Joining us today, his films are A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon and Astronauts Going Wild, author of Moon Man, the true story of a filmmaker on the CIA hit list, launching lies out of our atmosphere, blasting off the doors of NASA vaults to help land us on the surface of an uncomfortable truth. Houston, we have a solution, and that solution is total exposure of the fraud, the Moon Man, the Moon Myth, the Lunar Legerdemain. I am over the moon and welcoming him back to the show, Bart Sibrel. Bart, welcome back, my friend.
Thank you, Josh. How you doing?
I'm quite fine. How you been?
Yeah, not too bad. I like your graphic in the background there.
Oh, yep. This is my classroom. And as you can see, I'm just a student in this classroom. So
yes, I think I would have a crush on my teacher.
Yeah.
I'd be like Opie, having a crush on his teacher.
So jumping into it here, the last time we chatted, you convinced us all that the moon landings were a complete and utter fabrication. It was a stage production, to say the least. So I would like to start this episode by tackling the why they put so much effort into it. Do you believe that the whole NASA deception was an early cultural push into the religion of scientism and technocracy?
Well, I guess it was indirectly or inadvertently. It is what mankind, I would assume, claims is the greatest accomplishment that mankind has ever done, right? Putting a man on the moon. So how ironic that that event was completely falsified. And that's why my film, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, which you can see for free at Sibrel.com, just my last name.com. It opens up with scripture. Where there is pride, then comes disgrace. And everything concealed is meant to be revealed. And then let us build a tower that reaches to the heavens so that we can make a name for ourselves. And we show the Tower of Babel. Now, the Tower of Babel, until about 200 years ago, the greatest technological achievement of mankind is the tallest building. And it was that way for many millennia. And the Bible says that the only reason they wanted to build the tallest building was to boast. Our building is taller than yours, right? And that competition is still going on to this day. There's one building in Dubai and Tokyo, and they're all trying to make a building 1 story taller, the next year. And then we show, of course, the Tower of Babel was never finished, an important distinction, right? Then we show thousands of years go by and mankind builds the largest single machine ever built. And that was in 1912, and that was an ocean liner by the name of Titanic. And they put in publicity the ship that God himself could not sink. Also, never completed, never made one voyage. Then we show Richard Nixon talking to people who were allegedly on the moon when in fact we know they were not. And he said, even though he knew it was staged, he said, putting a man on the moon is the greatest event since creation. So you see, there's a common thread here. It is the greatest boast of each historical period. The tallest building, never finished. The ship that God himself could not sink, never made one voyage. And Nixon boasting, putting a man on the moon is second only in greatness to the creation of the universe. On top of the fact that he knew they weren't there. The guy doesn't even show up for the launch. Can you imagine? The whole world is watching. The United States put a man on the moon, and he's too afraid to show up and have a picture of him shaking Neil Armstrong's hand, and for the whole thing to unravel and be exposed as a fraud. Once he got away with it, then he shows up for the second launch. Imagine. So yeah, it does represent something. And that's why I think it's so hard for people to see the truth. Josh, I think I probably mentioned in the last interview, but I talked to a college professor once at an aerospace university, and I laid out really undeniable proof that the moon landings were fake, that would prove it in a court of law 4 times over. He said there's nothing I could ever show him that would ever make him recant the glorious moon landings. And I said, well, what if you saw Buzz Aldrin tearfully confessing on national TV the moon missions were fake and he's sorry? The guy said he'd still think he walked on the moon anyway. I mean, he's saying when he's a 10-year-old watching it on TV, he knows better than the guy who was actually there. It's a religious attachment for him. He will not blaspheme mankind's greatest accomplishment. Well, my book called Moon Man, The True Story of a Filmmaker on the CIA Hit List, which is at Sibrel.com in audio, which I read, or Kindle or print, we have the deathbed confession of a gentleman who was actually at Cannon Air Force Base in 1968, who stood beside President Johnson while they filmed the fake moon landing. And he testified this as he was dying of cancer, gave us a list of 15 people that President Johnson personally gave to him of the VIPs who are allowed in to eyewitness the faking of the moon landing. And so, I mean, we have classified footage we uncovered of them faking being halfway to the moon with a 1-foot model. We have shadows intersecting at 90 degrees when they should be parallel in sunlight. We have the logic that you can't have 1,000 times greater space traveling capability in 1969 than you do today, when with 5 decades better technology, they can only send an astronaut 1,000th the distance to the moon, when it should be, you know, to Mars and in another solar system by now. You know, that you can't have greater technology in the past and in the future unless there's been an asteroid strike, right? So there hasn't been one in 50 years. So that's the issue. You can't, that proves it just logically. No technological breakthrough was not able to be duplicated by anybody on Earth 50 years later. That's like saying Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic in 1927, but here we are. No one can fly over the Atlantic. We're just stuck here. You know, when thousands and millions of aircraft, millions of times more complicated, are flying back and forth. So you can't have a breakthrough technology become stagnant if it's real, which proves it was falsified. And then when you have classified footage or them faking being halfway to the moon, a deathbed confession, it just is a fact that they did not go. And now the government is kind of stuck with this lie that they have to keep defending. And one of the chapters in my book called NASA's Greatest Fear is a conversation that I had with one of the Apollo astronauts' widow and son, who says that their father and husband, who would have been the first man to walk on the moon, was murdered by the CIA for being a whistleblower. That's not my opinion. It's the opinion of the dead man's widow and son. So this is NASA's greatest fear. It'd be one thing if they faked it and didn't kill anybody, but to have, you know, used our tax dollars, a third of our income goes to federal income tax, right? To use that money to lie to us, and then to use that money to hire and pay the salaries of CIA agents who murdered our neighbors, who are trying to expose their crimes. This is our federal government. And this is why they're so concerned that the truth about the moon landing fraud will come out, because it will outrage the public. Less than 2 years ago, when I was confirming this information for the publication of my book with the son whose father, you know, told him on his deathbed, he was there during the filming of the fake moon landing. This guy's house was broken into, all the stuff about his dad was taken, and he was met by 2 government agents less than 2 years ago, who said that if he ever spoke to me again, they would kill him and his family. So this is very serious, because it's so different than 9/11 or JFK, because whoever did those things, it's still a tragedy. This is a positive lie, where the American public prayed and held parades for them, gave them medals of honor for lying. You know, these are our heroes because they lie so well. I think taking that away from the public will enrage them more than who shot JFK, because they're going to find out that our government is completely out of control, arrogant criminals and murderers. And they are to this day, because when Orwell said, whoever controls the past controls the future, this is the perfect example of that, because these same criminals are saying about the past that the moon missions were real, when they certainly were not. And therefore, those same criminals are controlling our destiny today and in the future. Which also means the truth has to come out about the moon landing fraud. It has to be confessed and acknowledged by the federal government. Otherwise, they will never be honest ever again. So.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's not just about the moral outrage. It also encourage people to question and examine everything much more thoroughly. I mean, they'll go back and look, the people that you couldn't convince to even look at a video of the planes CGI'd into the side of the Twin Towers, things like that, and things happening now, such as, the CGI background of every time Biden walks on a stage, just little things like that. It will really disrupt the illusion that they create all around us.
Yeah, I mean, I remember looking at pictures. In fact, I used to have a book about fake photography throughout history, and there were pictures that Stalin was faking and Hitler was faking, removing people from the picture, putting people in the picture who they wanted to distance themselves with or claim they were, associated with or whatever. That's been going on for a while, and unfortunately, it's still going on. And the government keeps writing these laws, making lying to their own citizens legal somehow, when there used to be laws in place that said it was illegal. They've retracted those laws. So this is kind of a sad world that we're in, where the greatest accomplishment of mankind is complete forgery, and they're so juvenile and immature they don't have the guts to admit it.
So what do you believe NASA's involvement in our current transition into the New World Order is?
Well, I don't know. I mean, other than the New World Order, if you kind of look at what that means as a clear definition, it simply means whoever's number one will not be number one anymore, right? It's a new order. Whoever's considered number one economically or whatever, militarily, they won't be number one anymore. So that simply means the US is going to be knocked out of place, and someone else will be the new military and economic leader of the world. Economically, that is already China. China already has a more robust economy than the United States. I'm not sure about their military, but I do know someone who works at the Chinese Space Agency. And they told me that it is, very understood that the moon missions were fake. In fact, it's taught in schools throughout China that the moon missions were fake. They have an agreement with NASA to not say so publicly in exchange for technology from NASA. They also have never said that they were real, if you take special note. China never said the moon landings are real. They won't do that. That would be dishonorable to them. But they've also never said that publicly that they were fake, because they have a deal not to. This is one of the reasons people don't understand. They think if the Soviet Union or China found out it was fake, they would blurt it out to the world. Not really. It would be much more valuable to blackmail the entity, right? If I had a picture of a world leader with a prostitute, I could upload it to the internet and take it down, and then the picture is worth nothing. Or I could blackmail them year after year after year. Why do you think during the Apollo program, Richard Nixon went from saying the Soviet Union is a big enemy to, during the Apollo program, suddenly selling them grain for below cost? And then the same with China. China's a big enemy. And then during the Apollo program, he goes over there and kisses their butt and opens trade relations, because whoever is the receiver of the visitor is the greater entity. Right? Look at the Bible and Solomon. Solomon didn't travel the world to visit people. People came to him. That's very well established culturally in the Far East, that when someone visits you, they are humbling themselves to you. So Nixon, after calling China a big enemy, goes over there and humbles himself and opens trade relations right during the Apollo program. I wonder why. And right during the Apollo program, he negotiates a deal to sell the enemy Russia food below cost, really, because they both figured out through espionage, through satellites, that the moon missions were fake, and they're blackmailing the United States, and they're blackmailing us to this day. That's another good reason for the truth to be exposed. The problem is, I think, like you, it'll be the finger out of the dike, and then people will start asking, well, if you were so arrogant as to lie about that, what else? Right? I heard the same thing. It's like, oh, planes didn't even hit the building. And I'm the conspiracy guy, right? I'm like rolling my eyes. And then I look at it, and I'm like, oh, it does look like a fake airplane hitting the building. And one of them, I don't know if you've seen this, it looks like a big silver ball bearing the size of an automobile going through the building. And apparently they superposed an airplane on top of it. And I'm like, wow. I mean, I used to think when I heard chemtrails, oh, give me a break. Then I start getting up an hour before sunrise every day. I live nowhere near the airport. I look up, they're doing it under cloak of darkness. And right as the sun is coming up, there's a literal grid in the sky, day after day, year after year. I have multiple pictures of it. You do a time lapse of those trails, they don't disappear. They widen and widen and widen, and they fill the grid and form this blanket cloud in the sky. It is weather modification, and it's not being talked. Could that not be talked about? How can putting chemicals in the air not be talked about when it's obvious? You can look up and see it every morning. You know, and they must be bad for you, other because they don't want to talk about it. I mean, the media is so controlled it boggles the mind how everything the media says virtually is propaganda. There is no free press. It's guaranteed by the Constitution, and the Constitution is being violated in that regard all the time. If YouTube is a neutral publishing platform like they claim to be, and I'm a journalist, then how can they possibly take down videos that a journalist makes because they disagree with his opinion? That's not freedom of the press, is it? And when we have a press that repeats every story word for word on every network that's supposed to be independent of one another, that's not a free press. So the fact that it's owned by corporations is a violation of the Constitution. And the fact that they're repeating information that the government gives them is a violation of the Constitution. The Constitution was written to protect the people from the government. And so how are they taking advantage? They're breaking the free press law. And it's the government who is lying to the American people through the media. That's why our founding fathers and mothers said we need to have a free press. And that's why criminals are doing the exact opposite, right? Because then it would expose their crime. So we don't have a free press. That's a continual violation of the Constitution. And you know, it just gets worse every day because these criminals keep getting away with it and it emboldens them to just do more and more and more. I mean, when Bobby Kennedy Jr., who has more access to JFK files than Oliver Stone does, says that his uncle, President Kennedy, was killed by the CIA, you better believe it. So I think that's called election interference, isn't it? When a duly elected president is murdered by a government agency who doesn't like him because he's going to get rid of that government agency, I would say that's election interference. It's not from Russia. It's not from China, right? So, I mean, who's doing anything about that? It boggles the mind. You have William Benny worked for the NSA for 30 years. He says, oh, we spy on Supreme Court justices' private cell phone conversations so we can get sexual and financial dirt on them to blackmail them to vote the way we tell them. He even says it on the mainstream media. It's an established fact. No one contradicts him. And there's not a single investigation into Supreme Court justices being blackmailed. How can that be? How can the FBI go after the guy who leaks that it is contrived for Bernie Sanders to get more votes, but Hillary Clinton gets more delegates anyway? The guy who leaks that fact, which has never been, contested as a fact, that the FBI goes after the person who leaks that. But they don't go after the Supreme Court justices being blackmailed by their own intelligence agencies. You can't even go to William Benny's site. It won't let you get to his website. You can't get to it to read all the documentation in his testimony about how the Supreme Court is being blackmailed by the CIA and the NSA. Is that a free press? I mean, I was at NASA and I had an appointment and I was on the register and I had media credentials from myself and from them there to interview astronauts. And I asked a question they don't like, and security forces, escorted me to the door and said, never come back. That's not a free press because, the Kennedy Space Center, Johnson Space Center, whatever it's called, that's paid by our tax dollars, right? And I'm a journalist with credentials and with an invitation. And they kicked me out because I asked a question about their corruption. That sounds like China or North Korea, doesn't it? No, it's the United States of America. Boggles the mind, right? What can you do? I've showed the tape of fake footage of the crew of Apollo 11 using a 1-foot model dated 2 days into the flight, faking being halfway to the moon, to two NBC news directors who both agreed it proved they didn't go to the moon. One said he wouldn't air it because he was afraid it caused a civil war. The second one paid thousands of dollars for exclusive rights, had it scheduled to broadcast nationwide, and got a threatening call from the United States government telling them not to expose their corruption, or we'll get you. This goes on all the time. What can you do, right? So voting doesn't matter, for one, because people voted for Kennedy and they took him down. So voting doesn't matter. And then Congress and the Senate, they didn't vote to fake the moon landing, did they? Whoever really runs the country did it anyway. So voting for your representative doesn't matter, does it? 90% of Americans wanted GMO labeling. The president vetoed it, said, no, I'm going to do what the corporations tell me to do. Now, a democracy is supposed to be 51% having their way. We had 90% of Americans agreed on something. We want to know if our food contains GMOs. You know, GMOs are illegal in Europe. They're illegal in Germany. They're illegal in France. They're illegal in England. To put genetically modified food in the food supply is illegal in England. It's illegal, but it's allowed here. There are 17 food ingredients that if you put them in food in Europe and even Singapore and Asia, you will go to jail. But they're perfectly edible here in the United States, the very same ingredients, right? And so we just want to know, GMO, 90% can't have their way. So how could this possibly be a democracy? It's not, it's a lie. Voting is just to distract each other, kill each other off so we don't go after the corrupt people at the top. And it seems to be working fine. They're doing the same system over and over and over again, and no one does anything about it because they have it so under control. So what can you do? Save yourself from this corrupt generation, right?
Yeah, why fix what's not broken? I mean, if the if the same system works generation after generation, why would they change it unless we force them to change it? And speaking about media, a funny thing happened to you on the way to CNN. Would you mind walking us through that?
Well, my book goes into this. I haven't talked about this in interviews in the past, and I didn't put it in my movies, but my book, which is on audio, I read it, or Kindle or print at Sibrel.com, goes into kind of the behind the scenes adventures in making my films, exposing the moon landing fraud. And after I found this classified footage where you pop it in and it says first thing on the screen, do not show to the public. And even though I asked for unedited footage from NASA, everything was pre-edited and pretty much the same footage over and over again. This tape was unedited. This was a behind the scenes special effect reel of the crew of Apollo 11 using a 1-foot model to pretend they're halfway to the moon when they were still in Earth orbit. And what a surprise, 50 years later, they still can't leave Earth orbit. That's why there's mannequins orbiting the moon in Artemis, right? Odd, isn't it? With 1 millionth computing power cell phone, they can play golf and drive cars on the moon. But 5 decades better technology, they can only send mannequins to orbit the moon and not even land. In any case, when we found footage that convinced 2 NBC news directors that the moon missions were fake, that's how condemning the footage is. I freaked out. I started having phone calls interrupted. I was followed from church in the late at night, leaving a church on a Wednesday. I was literally, they zapped my car and something happened to my car. It stopped running while I was being chased. I flagged down a taxi. I, rushed to a safe house where I have a duplicate of the footage. I hire a taxi to drive me to CNN in the middle of the night to give to a journalist friend there. I'm literally stopped on the doorsteps of CNN. The tape is confiscated. I'm drugged with some exotic drug that's so strong it causes me to throw up. I guess it was true serum. They have a clipboard. They ask me a bunch of questions. I tell them what they want to know. I escape their custody. I make my way back to Nashville and I pee in a cup and I say, aha, I got him. I'm going to prove I was drugged by some exotic true serum drug that only the CIA or people like them would have access to. So I pee in a cup, I give it to a friend to put in a lab in his name, trying to outwit the CIA, a little optimistic. And after a few days, he calls back and says, well, there was a problem at the lab. And I'm like, oh, what problem? He says, well, they had a break-in over the weekend. And I'm like, yes, so what? He says, well, funny thing, the only thing stolen was your urine sample. So, you know, what can you do? It freaked out the people who ran the lab. They're like, we don't know who you are, but take your business elsewhere. So all of these strange adventures, I go into great detail in my book, Moon Man, the true story of a filmmaker on the CIA hit list. And that's at Sibrel.com. And that title came from a recording that we found when we made the follow-up film, Astronauts Gone Wild, where on multiple occasions in the film, I have a sit-down interview with an Apollo astronaut, and I show them this footage of fake photography that proves they never left Earth orbit. On one occasion, one astronaut, Edgar Mitchell, became beet red, became so angry and violent, literally kicked me, assaulted me from behind. And in the commotion of all this happening, we left a high quality wireless microphone on him. And in the commotion, my camera operator forgot to hit stop record. So while he and his son are in their house with the doors closed talking privately, our camera is unintentionally recording their audio in the back seat of the rental car in his driveway. And months after the transcript was done, the film secretary calls me up excited. Oh, do you know what they're talking about privately in their house while you're, in the driveway about to leave? And I'm like, I don't know what. She says they're talking about calling the CIA to have you killed. And I'm like, yeah, that's funny. She says, no, Bart. They're talking about calling the CIA to have you killed. I'm like, yeah, that's funny. She says, Bart, you're not hearing me. They're talking about calling the CIA to have you assassinated. I'm like, really? She says, really? If you can hear it, if you want to call the CIA and have him, Bart Sibrel, whacked. And why would they have to do that if they really went to the moon? I'm some silly person who thinks it was shot on Earth. Well, we have an eyewitness, right? An eyewitness is a pretty serious legal strength, right? In court, if someone eyewitnesses someone kills somebody, that can send them away, can't it? And a deathbed confession is even more powerful. So we have a confession of a gentleman. I didn't even publish his name in the book because his son was still alive, himself dying. So now I can tell you, it was Cyrus Eugene Akers. He was the chief of security at Cannon Air Force Base in 1968. Now, I did some research at Cannon Air Force Base is the headquarters for the Special Ops Intelligence Division of the entire United States Air Force. And that's where they filmed the faking of the moon landing on June 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of 1968. And on the first day, President Johnson, whose, I guess, log or calendar shows that he was on, quote, holiday, 1 hour flight away, shows up and gives Cyrus Eugene Akers a list of 15 people, and only these people are allowed in to observe this highly secretive event. We published that list in the book. Some of these people are still alive. And so as he was dying, he confessed that he eyewitnessed the faking of the moon landing. And actually, Josh, he confessed something else as well. That is not actually in the book because his son was still alive. He actually confessed something worse than that. He personally murdered a coworker to keep it a secret. We don't know whether President Johnson ordered him to do that or he did it of his own initiative as the chief of security. But this coworker friend thought it was morally wrong to fake the moon landing, and he was going to tell the reporter that he had eyewitnessed it. And so he killed him to keep it a secret. Now, you don't make that stuff up as you're dying, hoping to get right with God. He confessed he was a murderer, and he murdered somebody, and he said the reason is to keep the moon landing fraud a secret. He himself was threatened with death if he told anybody, and his son, less than 2 years ago, was threatened with death for just talking to me about it and knowing that it would be published in my book. So This is what's really going on in the world. We have homicides of this person, at least 3 homicides of the Apollo 1 crew who were killed by the CIA, according to their own relatives. And several other people were likely killed to cover up the moon landing fraud as well. And even though that's probably fewer people than the JFK witness list, it has a different impact on people if they were to find out the truth. It would be different. It's like telling a child there's not Santa Claus. You see, when I was told there was no Santa Claus, I cried and cried and cried all night long. And this is different. Whoever shot JFK, he's still dead. Whoever did 9/11, they're still dead. But this is positive. This is candy. This is taking candy away and giving the public a turd instead. You see, that's going to make them mad in a way that I think whoever did JFK won't. And that's why they're so concerned that the truth about the moon landing fraud will come out, because it epitomizes the arrogance of the federal government, that not only did they take an equivalent of $200 billion to not go to the moon, to lie, they used some of that money to murder their own citizens who were going to expose their crimes. Now, the first legal document of the United States of America is the Constitution. It's the Declaration of Independence, which says that when any government becomes destructive of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. And that's why they killed Kennedy, because he was going to abolish the murderous, criminal CIA, you see? And so what we have here is our own government taking life away from their own people to cover up their crimes. And you know what? That gives us the right to alter or abolish that form of government. And it gives us legal authority to get rid of the federal government, because they have started killing their own people intentionally to cover up their crimes, right? It's odd that a news director at NBC News saw the footage I uncovered of fake photography, agreed 100%, proved it was fake, but was afraid that if we exposed it, it would cause such an outrage of the American public that it would cause a civil war. And I'm like, wait a minute, you're saying that if we expose the crimes of the federal government, that it will bring down the criminal federal government? Isn't that what's supposed to happen? You see? And so this is what they're afraid of, because then it will be known that they took life away from their own people, and that their way of life, their business, will be brought to an end. And they don't want that, right? How many criminals turn themselves in? I've never heard of it happening a single time. They go to court dragging, kicking and screaming and denying that they're guilty when they are. And that's why they killed Kennedy, because he threatened to take them down. And that's what the truth about the moon landing fraud could do. It could take down the people who are criminal, who are running our government today. And that's why they threatened. The son of the man who I witnessed the moon landing fraud less than 2 years ago, just for talking to me about it, you see? So this is a sad and serious state that our country and the world is in, because remember, the United States claims to be the hero of the world, when the CIA repeatedly boasts that they assassinate democratically elected leaders of other countries. That's illegal. That's the job of the army to do only during wartime, for an intelligence agency to do. And yet they boast about it openly, that they're breaking the law. It boggles the mind. They boast, or it's known fact, that Supreme Court justices are being blackmailed by the CIA. Not a single investigation by Congress or the Justice Department or the FBI. How could that be? Because all those departments are corrupt.
We're so far removed from the staged moon landings that many might hear it as an exaggeration to say that its exposure would lead to some sort of downfall. But what people need to take into account are how many different moving pieces are involved in keeping this lie going. And you have a major government organization that's taking our tax funds to funnel it into this lie. And then you have like you said, intelligence agencies that are continually keeping it up through murder. and you have the media involved, you have academia, you have historians. It just everything in the book that builds up our institutions and establishment in our country and other countries as well, and our position in this world that we live in, and what we think of ourselves as a nation and a people, and what keeps us in allegiance to our government. It would be a major downfall. It would be a snapping before the sleeping eyes of this people that we that are slumbering at this time. It would be a major event, yes.
Yeah, I mean, why William Benny? If the press was really doing its job, they would talk about that until there was an investigation of the Supreme Court justices being blackmailed, but they never talked about it. So they do stories about the president getting a new cat, but they don't do a story about the Canadian-U.S. border being blocked for 2 weeks, not a single time, because they don't want protests against the government to become contagious. That story about William Benny should have been going on until the people who were blackmailing the Supreme Court justices were thrown in jail. But that's not what's happened, because the press is controlled by the CIA. One of the documents I publish in my book is one discovered by Woodward and Bernstein at the CIA that said at the time of, think of 1975, they had 400 journalists on the CIA payroll working for every major TV station, radio station, newspaper, magazine, and wire service, which just repeats what they're fed. So all the information is coming from the top. I called up NBC News, where I used to work, and I said, hey, you've got this news story about these numbers of infections coming from a particular hospital. Did you, talk to any of these people who are allegedly sick? And they said, no, we just repeat the numbers the government tells us. So a guy in command center in Houston said that he could tell no difference between a simulation and an actual flight. Just a bunch of numbers going by on the screen. So you see, so just because every TV station said men were on the moon doesn't mean it's true, does it? And so NBC News isn't doing their job. They've never verified these numbers of fatalities or illnesses of what's been going on for the last 3 years. They just repeat the numbers the government tells us. The same government that gave numbers that the spacecraft was 100 feet above the surface of the moon and 50 feet and 25 feet, when the whole thing never was anywhere near the moon. You see? So something's wrong here. We claim to be the democracy light of the world when we're utterly corrupt and can't have any truth, any freedom at all. Everything the government says pretty much is a lie. They say we have the best healthcare in the world when 70% of the population is taking prescription medicine. That means 70% of the population is sick. Is there any country in the world that has 70% of the population sick all the time? Whatever country that is has the worst healthcare in the world, obviously. If you remove heart disease and cancer, the #1 cause of death in America is medical malpractice. Kills 500,000 people a year that we know of. I mean, that's unbelievable. And that's the best healthcare in the world? I mean, come on. And so we're told that we're free. The exact opposite is true. We're slaves. If you have to ask permission to open your business, permission to go shopping, permission to go to the beach, permission to go to church, then you're a slave, aren't you? Right? If one person has to give permission to another, then they're the master. I thought the government were our servants, and suddenly they become our masters, telling us when we can do, when we cannot do this, that, and the other, which is supposed to be left up to the individual, isn't it? So what can you do? We're being lied to. We're being tricked. I mean, that's the best way to have a slave, isn't it? Is to make them think that they're free, when in fact they're in a cage, right? So
Yeah. And an inmate who doesn't see his cell is pretty easy to keep imprisoned.
yeah, we're not the land of the free. We're the exact opposite. No free press, no free speech, no free of movement. You can't move without a permission slip. It's unbelievable.
Right. So SpaceX, Blue Origin, Virgin Galactic, what is the agenda in moving the space travel deception from government organizations to the corporate dimension?
Well, I don't think they're trying to deceive anybody that I'm aware of in SpaceX or anything like that. They have repeated failures, which shows you the truth of how difficult space travel is, even with 5 decades better technology. For example, Elon Musk, the first time he tried to land a rocket vertically, and this is with the rocket having about 100 million times more computing power than the Apollo rocket did. The first time he tried to land a rocket vertically, it blew up. Second time he tried, it blew up. Third time he tried, it blew up. Fourth time he tried, it blew up. And this is with 100 million times greater computing power than the lunar module landing vertically on the moon 6 times in a row 50 years ago. I wonder how that happened. You see, so Elon Musk is well aware, in my opinion, that we did not go to the moon. I know for a fact he has a copy of my book. So he's playing ball. He wants to, fulfill his dreams of going into space or whatever, and he needs NASA's cooperation to do that. And he's doing like the guy at the Chinese Space Agency told me, he's playing along, not going to call them on the fake moon landing in order to get technology from them. Elon Musk is doing the same thing the Chinese Space Agency is doing. The fact is, by the time anyone is capable of going beyond Earth orbit, or exposing the moon landing fraud, we're probably going to have some national, international calamity, like a real pandemic or a meteor strike, that no one's going to care whether the moon missions were real or not, and no one's going to care if you go into outer space to the moon or orbit or Mars or whatever. We're approaching a time like that. Because Janet Napolitano said the day she resigned, kind of like Eisenhower's last little words about the military industrial complex, he had a warning, but she had a warning as she left Homeland Security Director. She said a natural disaster is coming that has never happened before in the United States, and whoever has to deal with it is going to need a big bottle of Tylenol. So there's 3 clues here. What's coming is natural disaster. It's a natural disaster that has never happened in the history of America, and it's a natural disaster somehow you could know about years in advance. So we've had volcanoes and hurricanes and earthquakes, and you can't predict those years in advance. But we've never had a comet or an asteroid or a rogue planet go by. That's a natural disaster. It's one that's never happened in the history of America, and it's one that you could know about years in advance because of the geometry. So I think something like that is happening, going to happen in the near future. And this little thing we've been going through for the last 3 years is kind of a drill and an attempt to lower the number of people on the earth ahead of that catastrophe so that it's not as much of a shock. If a comet or asteroid were to hit, you could have half the people on the earth die in 1 year. So if they can reduce that number in advance of that event, then I think they feel like they'll be better prepared for it. And I think that's what they're doing with this little scenario for the last 3 years. I think something like that is coming. So by the time SpaceX or anybody could leave Earth orbit, there won't be a priority at all. And if the moon landing fraud were to come out during such a scenario as a comet or asteroid, no one would care. They'd be more concerned about where to get food and water and shelter.
So where do you stand on the whole Planet X debate?
Well, I did a lot of research of that. If you go to Sibrel.com and scroll down about halfway, you'll see an article that I spent a couple hundred hours researching and writing called "Is Planet X God's End Time Tribulation?" And it appears that that's a very strong possibility. Most people don't know, but prior to 705 BC, every civilization that had astronomers with good calendars, like the Egyptians and the Mayans and the Hebrews and the Chinese, they all had the year of Earth at 360 days prior to 705 BC. That's why there's 360 degrees on a compass. It also is interesting because that would mean that every month had exactly 30 days. 12 tribes of Israel 12 months, exactly 30 days each. Now, that'd be hard to argue against divine creation, wouldn't it? How could you argue that that happened by accident? You could you? So prior to 705 BC, there was divine testimony in nature of creation. How about that? And then right after 705 BC, something happened. The Bible in Second Kings says the sundial went backwards at that time. Actually, it's steps. The shadow went backwards on steps. So the earth didn't stop rotating, go the other way, stop and go back. It tilted. So funny that the calendars changed in 705 BC, and funny that according to biblical time in 705 BC, the earth tilted, both at the same time. And then immediately after, the year of the earth became 365 and a quarter days. It lengthened by 5 and a quarter days. How could that happen? Well, it means that the earth was pulled further away from the sun, slightly, that it took a little bit more time to go the extra distance. Okay, so what could pull the earth further away from the sun? Well, something much bigger than the earth. They're just now reporting, as the Illuminati like to hint at things, they're now saying that rogue planets are commonplace, and that statistically, every solar system in the universe probably has 2 rogue planets nearby, right? So it appears that in 705 BC, a rogue planet came by the Earth and pulled it further away from the sun. And it's interesting, if you believe in the Bible, Isaiah, which actually talks about the last days a lot. I know that Daniel is about the last days and Revelation is, but so is Isaiah. It constantly refers to, quote, the day of the Lord. And that's about Judgment Day, the end of the world. It says at that time, people will throw gold into the streets like it's garbage. That it will be so bad. It says in Isaiah 13:13 that what will happen is, quote, the earth will be moved out of its place. Isn't that what happened in 705 BC? The earth was moved out of its place, and if it's a rogue planet with a comet-like orbit, that means it would come around again at some point in the future and potentially move the earth out of its place again. It would also cause meteor showers because Jesus says one of the signs will be the stars will fall from the sky like ripe figs. I think that's a meteor shower. And then he says, men's hearts will melt with fear for the sights in the heavens about what is coming upon the earth. And one of the signs will be the tossing and turning of the seas. Well, the moon, right, 1/4 the size of the earth, causes the tides to go in and out by about 20 feet. Imagine if planet X is about 7 or 10 times larger than the earth, which would be 30 times or so larger than the moon. That would really cause the tides to roar, right? It causes because of the tossing and turning of the seas. So that's another indication that there could be a rogue planet coming, because that would cause the tossing of the turning of the seas everywhere in the world. So I think something like that is going to happen. The governments at the top, they know this, and that's why they're doing this little attempt to lower the number of people on the earth in advance of such an event. That's my opinion. And at that point, no one's going to care about space travel or what the government lied about or who shot JFK, right? So these people who run the world, they've said out of their own mouths they want to lower the population by 94%. So I think they're just going to let Mother Nature do a lot of it for them. So if there's a comet or asteroid coming or a rogue planet, they're certainly not going to tell us about it, and they're just going to let it happen. And they'll be prepared for it, and most of everybody else will not. It even says in Revelation that the kings and leaders of the earth went into caves and holes in the ground to escape what is coming upon the earth, right? And they just opened up Cheyenne Mountain a few years ago. It's a cave and a hole in the ground for the VIPs of the world to go to during, I believe, a meteor strike or something like that. So that's what's likely coming. I think that's what they're really preparing for, and that's what the bigger issue really is. And of course, our governments aren't going to tell us the truth. They never have. And why would they start? Right. I mean, this whole thing that there's a lab, suddenly they're saying a lab leak is true. I don't think that that's true at all. If that were true, they wouldn't have to fake the testing numbers and they wouldn't have to fake the death numbers. So they don't care why you believe that it's a real illness as long as you believe. If you believe it's real because it came from an animal, great. If you believe it's real because it came from a scientific facility, great. As long as you believe it's real. I think that's a lie also. Because at some point, let's just say every news station in the world said, hey, it's really from a lab, it's serious, and it's going to get worse. Well, what would that do? It would trick people into getting more shots, wouldn't it? You see? So that's what they're after. So they wouldn't have to fake testing numbers and fake death numbers if it were a real illness. They wouldn't have to do that. And if it accidentally, escaped, then you wouldn't have Mr. F say in 2017 there will be a surprise outbreak. And I did a report, I think on September 9th, 2016, still on my YouTube channel. The title is "The Government is Preparing to Quarantine You." It's 5 months before Mr. F said that there was going to be one, right? I saw the government preparing for such a thing. So it can't be an accidental, leak. And it's probably no leak at all. It's just, one story for the general public. And now you have to have a story for the alternative media, which is at least 25% of the population. And they're at least 4 times vocal, right? So you have to have 2 lies, one for the general public, came from an animal, get your injection, and another one for the other people, okay, it came from a scientific facility, but get your injection, you see? So I think that's a lie too. And people need to be careful, what they believe. I mean, the alternative media already knows the media lies about JFK, the moon landing, 9/11. So why should they believe them about Chinese balloons or lab leaks, right? They're being played. So.
Yeah, and it keeps us debating one another and scrambling for answers and in so many different directions that you can't keep on top of it, to the point that people just give up and leave it to the experts, the so-called experts, just trust the science. And that's where all roads lead in scientism. And that it's like whenever an astrophysicist claims anything about space, we just automatically believe it. Oh, Big Bang, okay. Oh, space is expanding, okay. Even though there's absolutely no way of taking a tape measure across the perimeter of the universe, we just say, okay, yeah, it's expanding, I guess so. But at the same time, they're saying the moon is moving away from the Earth 3.8 centimeters every year. So that tells you things are drifting apart. So are things drifting apart or is it expanding? There, there are all these different weird contradictions that we don't ask questions. And that's what all these lies on top of lies do to us, to where we can't ask enough questions. But I say that you should ask questions about the answers and demand answers of the questions, and then so on and so forth. So we're getting to the end of our time here, so I'll let you wrap this up however you like.
Well, I wish the moon landings were real. It would be a better world that we lived in. But when I popped in the tape of unedited behind the scenes photography and saw them faking being halfway to the moon, dated 2 days into the flight with the CIA on a 3rd track of audio, telling them how to fake a 4-second radio delay, what more can you say? They did fake going to the moon. It's not a theory, it's a fact. If you want to get the full story, the behind the scenes information, just go to Sibrel.com. S as in Sam, I-B as in boy, R-E-L, Sibrel.com. You get the book in audio, Kindle, or print, and it's interactive. There are 16 video leaks. I write a chapter, then I say, look, go to leak 1, so you know what I'm about to write and talk about next. Go to leak 2, and so forth. You can see all those links for free at Sibrel.com, and that's part of the book as well. So it's kind of interactive, chapter video, and so forth. And I wish the moon landings are real. It'd be a better world, but they didn't go. And if you want to know the truth and the backstory of my adventures, you can read about it in Moon Man, the true story of a filmmaker, on the CIA hit list, available at Sibrel.com.
All right, Bart. Well, just like last time, it's been absolutely a fascinating conversation. Absolute pleasure. Thanks for coming back on. You take
Sure,
care.
Josh. You take care. Be blessed.
All it takes is one small step in the direction of truth, liberty, and righteousness to make a giant leap away from the delusions, illusions, and abuses of tyranny. There are those who remain in perpetual orbit around your life, revolving around your data, spinning minds to the dark side of their doom. They plant false flags, imprinting their boots in the dream dust of our subconscious, ever rocking us to a lullaby of moonlit treachery. They captivate your eyes and dazzle the imagination with spectacles of scientific majesty. We hail their science as New Age gods, basking in the pale glow of their dominance over the heavens and the earth. We slumber at their feet, praising their gift of soft radiance upon the night. Please, great overlords, we beg, protect us from darkness. Give us your cool blue radiance of lies as a blanket from the world all around us. But you and I, we have seen the light of day. We have looked from awakened eyes. The harsh revelation has bestowed upon us a reality that we cannot unsee, that we refuse to unsee, for we have taken our small steps to reason, our legs flexed and readied for this next giant leap for mankind and our recovery of the weak, the meek, the weary, and the wandering. The countdown has long ago begun, and we are strapped in, gung-ho, launching this rescue mission in full force, all fuel blazing in the great lift, our greatest ascension. Love, peace, happiness. Signing off. Deuces.